Welcome back to another episode of the Casey Campbell podcast. Casey Campbell with you, of course. Pleased to be once again joined by my good friend Ben Schneider of Lastcar.Info and my co-host on Grid Live Encore. Had to mess up Thursday. Hey Ben, how's it going, man?
Hey, you didn't mess up at all. You got it right this time. No,
Yeah.
it's going great. I appreciate it. And yeah, we just got an article up on the Daytona race this weekend. A little bit frustrating for me to try to deal with the whole did not start status again. It's a very weird ruling this time because Andres Perez de Lara is not even old enough to compete at Daytona, but right now we have him in 40th place as a did not start with 80 laps completed. So try to figure that out. So
It's like from what and if you watched the episode, but usually ARCA would let someone, I think they've done this in the past. But they've always let somebody that, it just so happened that your birthday fell on there. I think they would let you take one slow lap around the track or something like that and make sure you get the points benefits and all that, because I know that there's all these other plans that I don't want to go into right now that gives a lot of the teams money or something. It's just like, I get 17-year-olds probably shouldn't run at Daytona, and I know they could for the test. And I know a lot of people were down. I mean 17, I think even 17-year-olds were down.
Well, it was weird in this situation because I saw a tweet from Front Stretch's Mark Crystal that confirmed that his 01 entry, of course, will normally be M2 that LeVar Scott was driving this year, but that entry had been withdrawn, and somebody replied to his tweet and asked, so is he going to get any points? And Mark said no, he gets 0 points. He'll be eligible for the 50-point bonus after 5 consecutive races still and all that. But then you go to Racing Reference and he's on the results sheet again, it gives him 4 points. So there always seems to be this discrepancy. So what we're going to do this year, and I encourage people to go read the article. I did make one mistake. I copied a template from last year to this year. So the reason out for the last place finisher is the radiator. We'll get that clarified and confirmed in the stats sheet or stats portion of the article at the bottom. But if it's a did not start, we're just going to disregard that for 2023 unless they take the green flag or leave pit road on race day. If it's a situation like we had last year when I went to Sonoma with Brian Kaminsky, and we saw him on track for Friday on practice for the practice session. My good friend Kyle Murphy was able to get a photo of that, so we had a photo of his car and everything, but he didn't make the start on Saturday. How we would rule that this year is we probably just would have taken Paul Pedroncelli as the last place finisher just for the sake of, I'm all about consistency, Casey, and want to make sure that we make these things as clear as possible. And Brock doesn't have a whole, way of doing this that he's historically gone back and looked at ARCA results from the beginning of time like he has with the top 3 series in NASCAR. So we're just trying to figure that out and establish how we rule it, because it does seem to be kind of inconsistent. We went through this with Sarah Burgess at Irwindale last year when she almost made her ARCA West start. There, I think, is still or was for a while at least. The ARCA website was listing her in the results, but Racing Reference wasn't, or vice versa. So just to try to avoid any confusion, if it's a did not start, we're gonna not worry about that and take the last place finisher as the driver who was the first to retire after actually starting the race.
Yeah, I see all the results from Daytona this weekend are on Racing Reference, by the way, and that took a few days. But yeah, it's just
I did.
Yeah, and I know you made an entire video on that. So
I didn't really make a I mean, I spoke unscripted into the mic for a few minutes to get some things off my chest. I wouldn't say I made a full-blown mini documentary or video or anything like that, but yeah, it is getting very frustrating, and I'm not saying this to attack any one person or any one group, but I think that this site is too important to see it in the state that it's in, and somebody you can tell when something is being done with a passion for the sport and something's just being done for a paycheck, and clearly whatever's happening in Racing Reference right now, it's simply not good enough, and I hope that we get some people on board to that project that can help bring it back to the great website that it once was, and in a lot of ways still is, because there is still a lot of historical data there. It's been archived and preserved, but we want to make sure that this season's data ends up being the same, especially in ARCA and the East and West Series as well.
Yeah. So let's I kind of want to go into this because obviously, if you watch the Grid Encore show this week, we started off with a discussion about the commercials, the TV, and all that stuff, and then we got into the streaming pay-per-view version of it, which I do believe that NASCAR is kind of looking into. I would think I would know this. I mean, I do have a lot of inside information, but obviously not on that. But overall, where do you think we should go with that? Is it like, because we got the TV contract coming up? Where does that? How do you see the new TV contract playing out?
Well, I would tell you this, Casey, as much as I am a believer in physical media, I think it's an absolute crime that Disney Plus, Marvel, and Star Wars shows aren't on Blu-ray. I think it's a crime Ted Lasso, which I just finished on Apple TV, isn't on Blu-ray yet. I am all about, DVDs and things like that. But I do acknowledge that streaming is the way of the future in many respects as well, and I value the convenience factor of it. I would like to think that both of those things can coexist, but I do understand NASCAR certainly wanting to consider. I mean, you look at what the NFL has done with Amazon on Thursday Night Football, and what baseball is doing with Apple, what MLS is doing with Apple. I mean, there are a lot of people getting into the streaming side of things here when it comes to live sporting events, and NASCAR I think should look at that as well. Now, if they're talking about using Peacock with their existing broadcast partner NBC, I don't think Peacock is quite at that level yet. In terms of being able to, host a race exclusively on there. I know they're doing an IndyCar race and they didn't release viewing figures, which I think kind of tells you everything you need to know, because when the Premier League games that they've been airing on Peacock have been doing really well, they've released the viewing figures for that. So when NBC just says, "Oh, it was in line with our expectations," I think that kind of hints that it didn't go so great. So I don't think that would be a direction that I'd like to see NASCAR take, at least not for right now. Who knows? Peacock may be the king of the streaming world in 5 to 10 years, but as of right now, I don't think it is. And I think if we're going to go down that road, it would need to be with a partner like Amazon or maybe a Netflix if they wanted to get into something like that, just because it's more widely, I wouldn't say more widely available, but I think more people subscribe to it, and you might have a chance for a larger audience on a platform like that, rather than with your existing partner at NBC with Peacock.
Do you think Netflix is ready for live sports? Because I always keep talking about like Netflix and all that stuff, and basically it's like, oh, we're losing all the shows, and then obviously you probably heard about and obviously everybody knows what they're going to be doing next month in terms of password sharing, which is basically will be physically impossible. I know there's going to be some restrictions toward that. With basically that if you're on, you have to have your own account, because everybody like shares their own account and stuff.
Yeah, I thought they were trying to walk that back, but I don't know. Maybe they're trying to slowly roll it out and hope people don't notice and make it a gradual thing over time. But I know they've been talking about that for years, so we'll see where it ends up.
Back to my original question, but do you think that Netflix can like produce live sport? I mean, because I know they were trying to go after F1. But do you think that they're ready to get a contract and like, oh, let's just air live sporting events?
Absolutely. I think they're big enough. Undoubtedly. I don't think that would be the issue. The issue would be, bringing in your on-air talent and making sure that you hire people who have experience doing this, that you can put together a quality production. I don't think money or size of the platform would be an issue there. I know, Casey, like you mentioned, they were considering looking at the F1 rights. I don't know if it would have been a similar deal like they have with like ESPN has with Sky Sports, where they just simulcast the feed from the UK. But if they were looking at that, there's no reason for me to believe that they wouldn't be looking at another form of auto racing. And when you think about the success of Drive to Survive, again, I don't know how much crossover there would be with the motor racing audience, but I'd have to think there would be some. Maybe Netflix would be, of all the different streaming services, maybe one of the more ideal ones after Amazon, or Prime Video, I guess I should say, to get into this bidding war here.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a couple of those NFL games. Well, obviously the games weren't as good, but I think the NFL is going to look into that, or maybe I know they were talking about. I know they're starting to flex Monday night games, and maybe even start to maybe possibly do that with Thursday night games. But honestly, if let's say if the Cup Series were exclusively streamed on Amazon, do you think that NASCAR is ready to go that route yet?
I mean that's a very good question. And again, I think that you can look at what NBC's done with putting a few races on Peacock, not exclusively. I think if those had been exclusive, they probably wouldn't have been ready for that. With Amazon, I mean, I can tell you this right now, Facebook wouldn't be happy. There'd be a lot of angry people who are more traditionalists who refuse to get on the streaming platforms that would suddenly have no way to watch the race. And of course, NASCAR's audience does skew a little bit older than Formula One's does, at least here in the United States. So I don't know. I mean, it's a good question that you've got there, but I think you have to start somewhere, and I think Amazon would probably be, based on what they were able to accomplish with Thursday Night Football, it would probably be the most ideal platform if NASCAR wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah. So here's the other thing. We were kind of going back to our commercials discussion. So when I referenced like the ads within the ads, so like during the race where they did all like the Wendy's and the Toyota stuff, it's like I get it. I get it. Companies spend a lot of money, and I know that NASCAR and obviously I think the and Fox Sports as a whole, I think use that to maybe pay some big bills that they have. So overall, how did you think the coverage went?
Man, let's see. Where do we want to go with this here? Um, I will say this: Mike Joy is a national treasure.
Yes.
Mike Joy does not deserve Fox Sports. Fox Sports does not deserve Mike Joy. He is far and away. He and Bob Pockrass, I should say as well, are the two that are carrying Fox's NASCAR coverage on their backs right now. And I don't say that as an insult to everybody else working on the coverage. There are still a lot of great people at Fox who do great work. But as a whole, I don't think they're as strong as they were when they first came into the sport. And I think that, and this isn't even Fox's fault necessarily, but Casey, we talked about this on the Encore show Monday night. I think that Fox has to look at a way to try to at least, if not eliminate the commercials, minimize the green flag interruptions that we're seeing. I was very surprised because a lot of people were saying it feels like it's worse than ever. It really actually isn't. When you look back at the 2001 Daytona 500 and the 2010 Daytona 500, both of which were aired on Fox as well. It was in line to the number of green flag laps that we missed due to commercial breaks. That being said, it's not 2001 anymore. It's 2023, and as times change and evolve, so do our expectations. And you look at what Formula One and ESPN have done, and what they've done in the UK with Sky as well, because that feed hasn't had commercials for a very long time. I know NBC took a lot of side-by-side breaks, but they did have their own broadcast team, so it wasn't, you didn't feel that same sense of interruption, and it was never full screen, if I recall correctly as well. I know the races are shorter, but and to his credit, Mike Joy was interacting with fans on Twitter a couple of days ago and was going through all the explanations for the behind the scenes stuff like you were, Casey, on Monday night. And I understand where he's coming from, and I certainly understand he has to defend his employer, but ESPN is, they got Formula One for a steal when they essentially nothing, right? When they came on board in 2018. Well, now Formula One's hugely popular here in the United States, so they're not going to be able to get away with that anymore. And Formula One knows that, ESPN knows that. They're going to be shoving up more money for the television rights, and as far as I know, are still trying their best to make sure that they can give us the commercial-free productions that they've been giving us for the last 5 years. So I don't know if that's as valid of a reason or excuse as it might have been 3 or 4 years ago. As the times continue to evolve and change, so do our expectations, like I was saying. And I think that this current generation, who have grown up with streaming platforms where a lot of times we even pay for the ad-free packages, we're not used to seeing commercials interrupt the TV shows we're binge watching. We're not used to seeing live sports where the action is interrupted with a full screen commercial, because most of the stick and ball sports have timeout periods where we take all the commercials where you're not missing any of the action
built in. Obviously,
yeah,
it's not like soccer.
There's no other sport aside from auto racing that has that. And soccer is the example that you just brought up, Casey, which I brought up Monday night as well. They have ways around that. They have presenting sponsors of the coverage. They have advertisement screens going around the stadium that change as the game's going on. So I think that, NASCAR, more than any other sport, I mean, every car is a 200-mile-an-hour billboard, for crying out loud. I think there are ways that we can bring in brand activations and partnerships to help these advertisers get the word out for what they're selling that don't interrupt the race. I think that's something that we really need to try to prioritize when it comes to this next TV contract in 2025.
Yeah, for sure. How, just overall, because here's the other thing, because television has really kind of changed overall. When you look at, look at just sports in general. I mean, even look at, there's also another interesting commodity in pivoting away from motorsports, because this is my podcast. I can say what I want. Well, not really, but for the most part. But
know what you mean.
The end, obviously, you look at the RSNs right now, especially I think the Diamond Sports, I don't know how much you know about that, but that's going to be really interesting to watch and see where all of that kind of goes into in there. Because the thing is, you have all these, because obviously if you remember, the RSNs were part of the Fox Sports, and when they had their deal with Disney, that was part of the package that got sold. I think Disney sold it to like Sinclair or something, and then who then turned it into where it is now. It'd be interesting to see. I'm not sure how much you know about that, but obviously, I don't think this will affect the. Obviously, I think you live in an area where the Comcast. I think this obviously does not affect any of the Comcasts or the AT&Ts or the. I don't think this affects the network either, or the SNY. Of course, obviously, Yes is owned by the Yankees. SNY is owned by the Mets, and I believe it's Nesson. I think it's owned by Boston or something.
Well, Boston has both Nesson and NBC Sports Boston. Nesson, I believe, does all the Red Sox games. NBC Sports Boston does the Celtics games,
and of course, does the Bruins games too.
Yeah, and down here it's I mean, I guess this doesn't really affect motor racing because it's
right.
Got a national audience and everything.
I just want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate that. Because I remember watching SportsCenter, seeing all the regional networks for these teams growing up, and it was weird seeing basketball under a Fox banner. It's weird still seeing here in Philadelphia the Flyers games under the NBC graphics and everything, considering nationally NBC no longer broadcasts the NHL. It's ESPN and TNT. So that's always been kind of weird, but I mean, it is interesting to look at the regional markets and setups here and see what what Bally's going through, obviously, with the bankruptcy issue, with how that's going to affect the local teams. I mean, I think you're definitely seeing some sort of change with the times here, and it's going to be interesting to see how we come out of it in the next few years.
Yeah, because I think if us, I mean, obviously I still have cable. Yes, I still do, and I still like it. But obviously I have all these streaming platforms. Like I said, I subscribed to MLB.TV last year, and I love it. I get every regular season baseball game and all that stuff. And I know that the MLB, the NHL, and the NBA have all came out and said we're monitoring that. We'll watch, where it's going to go. One more thing on this TV thing. This how do you feel like this? And I know you've had discussions on this on the Ben Schneider show with a couple times, but how do you feel like Live Golf will do this year? Because it's like they're on, I believe the CW, which is also where that IndyCar DTS show might be or something. How do you feel like they're going to do this year?
See, this is where the CW ranks in my mind. I completely forgot that IndyCar show was happening. I mean, Formula One gets Netflix, IndyCar gets the CW. I mean, that's just such a perfect representation of how it's gone the last few years, right? But yeah, no, I like I said, I've got a friend who is very much into golf, probably as into golf as I am into racing, and to turn it around, he's probably about into racing as much as I'm into golf in terms of being a casual viewer and fans. That's why I wanted to bring him on the show, so we could have that conversation and he could kind of tell me more about what's happening in the world of golf right now with the split and everything. I mean, I'll say this much: Liv certainly have some big names, and they're shoving up big money to get those big names. So I know that fans of those golfers who might, the whole Saudi Arabia issue might, turn them off a little bit, but there's, it's basically unavoidable in sports nowadays. And we can talk about this as Formula One fans. We race in Saudi Arabia now, and have a couple other races in the Middle East. We're going to countries that don't exactly have a perfect human rights record. We here in the United States don't have a perfect human rights record. I think we're certainly better than several other countries around the world. And I'm not saying we shouldn't race here. I think the notion that we're on the same level of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Bahrain and China is absurd. But people have pointed out the flaws in our history and made that argument. Nobody's perfect. But I think people that are looking for sports, I actually just saw a quote this morning from Christian Horner about sports being a form of escapism and entertainment. And I totally get that sentiment. I think it's kind of hypocritical coming from somebody in the world of Formula One, which is probably the most political form of motorsports that exists out there for various reasons. But I think if people are willing to put that aside and choose to only watch it for the sport that they're trying to enjoy, I think there's certainly going to be an audience out there. I mean, Phil Mickelson's probably been the second most famous American golfer over the last 20 years after Tiger Woods, right? So I mean, that is certainly a big name. It's going to draw some attention. They have several other major champions that are involved with it. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But again, the CW, I guess we can kind of say, if you had to pick like a fifth major broadcast network, I guess maybe the CW is in fifth place behind the big four, if you will. So I know that a lot of people have access to the channel. Sorry, what was that?
PBS. So.
PBS, yeah. Well, PBS is a little bit different, right? Because that's fewer.
Yeah, that's
and fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
but yeah, there's certainly going to be an audience, potential audience out there. Whether or not they're going to come to it, I think remains to be seen. But that'll be interesting to follow as well.
Yeah, I mean, it should be, because it's like I've always paid attention to golf and all that stuff, because it's like there's the PGA Tour and then the live golf side of things. It's like, and then it's like, oh, they're going away from this, they're going away from that. It's like, you can't golf here, we don't want your money. So that's always interesting, to debate there.
Well, it's really interesting watching a split like that play out in the era of social media and everything. You like imagine if the card IRL split happened today. And I got to tell you, Casey, it's eerie, just how similar it seems to be. You're talking about, back in the card IRL days, the hope that maybe the two sides could set aside their differences and race the Indy 500 together. Now they're talking about, can we at least come together for the four majors all throughout the year, and see if we can, invite the live golfers back for the Masters and the US Open, and not make that a big issue and everything. So like I said, there's a lot of, legal battles I'm sure that people are going through, and it's going to be very interesting to see where everything ends up here over the next few years.
Of course, that definitely should be interesting. Of course, F1 and IndyCar start next week. So how do you feel like those two series are going to do this year?
Well, Formula One should be back just as strong as ever. I think we're certainly still in that growth period and that wave of growing popularity here in the United States. I think there's a lot of excitement for a new season. I think a lot of people are hoping that somebody can take the fight to Red Bull and Max Verstappen this year. Hopefully that would be Ferrari. I think for the sake of the sport, it's best when they're running up front and at least competing for world titles, if not winning them. I know they haven't won one in a really long time, 15 years. But I think that they could be a potential threat, and we'll see if Mercedes can come back. I know they brought back the black livery for their cars this year. I don't know if that's a weight saving issue as much as it is wanting to go back to what they were trying to do in 2020 and 2021. But I think that they're obviously going to want to come back very, very strong, at the level that they were at before this most recent season, only winning one race towards the end of the year. And then of course there's always the question of whether or not anybody can get up there and break up the big three, whether it's McLaren or Alpine, or Fernando Alonso is going to be motivated to do well with Aston Martin. So I think there are a lot of good storylines, and I'm looking forward to it. IndyCar, again, I think is similar in a lot of respects, but there needs to be, and we've been saying this for years now, there needs to be a boost and the marketing side of things so that we can get more people tuned into the entire season rather than just the one big race at the end of May.
I think they're spending like I think I saw they're spending like $17 million on marketing this year. So it's definitely going to be interesting, and obviously, there's people don't forget. Obviously, there's Indy next, but there's 3 other series below that too. So they're actually called the USF Pro Championships or something. If that's like, but don't worry, I'll get you through all that on the Encore show. So yeah, so there's Indy next, there's USF Pro 2000. One of us is going to mess that up and say something different. So and then obviously USF 2000 and then USF Juniors will debut in a few weeks time. So that's definitely going to be interesting for sure. Oh yeah, remember there's an American on the grid in F1 too.
Yeah, that's right. Logan Sargent will be driving for Williams, of course, and I can't actively root for him in the role that I'm at Grid now these days, but I will certainly be hoping that everything goes well for him in his first season, that he continues to develop as a racing driver, because getting an American on the grid is something that I've wanted really ever since I first got into the series and thought we were going to get one with Alexander Rossi at the end of 2015 going into 16. Of course, he ended up taking a different path, and I think it turned out all right for him, right? He won the Indianapolis 500 or something just a few months later, right? So I'd say he's doing okay, but for Logan, I certainly hope that it goes well, and I hope that he can take this season to learn and develop and then really hit his stride in 2024.
For sure. All right. Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us. We'll do one of these again in a few months.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right. Thank you, Casey.